Okay, so picture this. You're shopping, maybe online, maybe in a store, and suddenly that pair of sneakers, or even your phone, costs way more than you expected.
Uh-huh.
And the reason, it could be this economic staring contest happening between the US and China. We're diving into the potential 2025 tariff situation today.
Right, and it's fascinating and maybe a bit scary how interconnected things are. It's not just about Washington and Beijing.
Exactly. This deep dive is all about unpacking these potential US tariffs on Chinese goods, but also looking way beyond that at the global ripple effect.
Well, sneakers are a good example.
Mm,
Seems small, but it connects to this huge global picture.
totally.
Yeah.
So let's get basic for a second. What is a tariff?
Well, simply put, it's basically a tax. A tax the government puts on goods coming into the country from somewhere else.
Like an extra fee on those fancy imported gadgets?
Pretty much. And the idea or the hope is that this extra cost makes the imported stuff less attractive compared to things made locally.
Makes sense. Boost the home team, sort of.
Yeah, that's the theory.
Yeah.
But when you apply this to the U.S. and China,
Mm.
well, the scale is just immense.
You're not kidding. We're talking the world's two biggest economies here. The amount of stuff flowing between them is, frankly, staggering.
Just look at 2024. China sent goods worth, what, over $500 billion to the U.S.?
$500 billion. That's everything from smartphones to, I don't know, socks probably.
And it goes the other way too, right? The U.S. sent a lot back to China.
Yep, about $143.5 billion worth. Think soybeans, corn, planes, lots of things.
So you mess with that massive flow, you're really shaking things up. The stakes are incredibly high.
Which brings us to China's side of this. For ages, their economy has been heavily reliant on, well, making things and selling them abroad.
They really became the world's factory, didn't they? Like
Yeah.
a chef who's just absolutely brilliant at one specific dish exports.
That's a great way to put it. But that strength, that focus, it also creates a vulnerability, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Because the U.S. is their biggest single customer for all that stuff they export.
So if your biggest customer suddenly says, hey, everything you sell me is going to cost like 45% more because of this new fee.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. Think of a lemonade stand where one person buys half your lemonade and suddenly they're not buying or they demand a massive discount. It throws everything off.
Right. So these potential tariffs, maybe up to 45% on some things, that cost has to go somewhere.
Either U.S. consumers pay more or U.S. companies just stop buying those Chinese goods altogether.
And either way, that could really slow down China's economy, even with their, what, 4.5% projected growth?
It could certainly put a dent in it. And you have to think about jobs, too. Their unemployment rate is around 5.4%. Tariffs could push that up.
So what can China do? Just find new customers overnight?
Well, it's not that simple. They can definitely try. Push harder into markets like Europe or Southeast Asia. Focus more on their own huge domestic market.
But shifting away from the U.S. market, especially quickly, that's tough.
It's a massive undertaking. Building those new relationships, adjusting supply chains, it takes a lot of time and effort. So the immediate hit could be significant, even if they adapt long term.
Which leads us to the next point. This isn't just a U.S.-China thing. It sends ripples everywhere. The global domino effect you mentioned.
Exactly. The whole world is connected through trade. When the two biggest economies have this kind of friction, everyone feels it.
Pamela Coke-Hamilton, head of the International Trade Center, she put out some pretty stark warnings, didn't she?
She did. She talked about a potential, get this, 80% plummet in trade between the U.S. and China if this escalates. 80%.
Wow, that's hard to even picture. That's basically shutting down a huge chunk of global commerce.
And she also said something really striking, that the fallout for developing countries could actually be more damaging than cuts to foreign aid.
More damaging than aid cuts. That really puts it in perspective. Why is that?
Well, think about what trade does versus aid. Trade builds industries, creates jobs, fosters long-term growth in a way aid often doesn't directly.
So cutting off trade routes, even indirectly, hits the core economic engine.
Precisely. And the ITC, her organization, backed this up with numbers. They projected global trade could shrink by 3 to 7%.
And global GDP, the total value of everything produced worldwide, could dip by 0.7%.
Now, 0.7% might sound small, but for the global economy, that's hundreds of billions of dollars just gone, like misplacing a truly colossal amount of money.
And developing countries get hit hardest. Why them specifically?
Often it's because their economies are less diversified. They might rely heavily on exporting just a few key things, maybe textiles, maybe a specific agricultural product, often to wealthier nations like the U.S.
So if tariffs disrupt that specific trade, they don't have many other options to fall back on quickly.
Exactly. They lack the resources and the variety of markets to pivot easily.
Let's make this concrete. Talk about Bangladesh.
Okay, Bangladesh, huge player in apparel, right? Second biggest clothing exporter in the world. Lots of our clothes come from there.
So what happens to them if the U.S. slaps on, say, a 37% tariff on textiles?
Well, the International Trade Center ran the numbers. They estimate Bangladesh could lose around $3.3 billion in exports by 2029.
$3.3 billion. That's a massive blow for their economy.
Huge. Think about it like a small business owner suddenly losing their biggest client, a major department store. Orders dry up.
Which means factories might slow down, maybe lay people off, some might even close.
Right. And sure, they can try to sell more to Europe, but rebuilding those trade routes, finding new buyers on that scale, it's slow and difficult. And the impact on families, on workers, it's very real.
Okay, let's look at Sri Lanka, too. They've had a rough economic patch recently, right?
They have. They're in recovery mode. And exports like tea and clothing are really crucial for them right now.
And the U.S. is a pretty big customer.
Yeah, the U.S. buys about a quarter of their merchandise exports. That's around $12 billion worth of goods in total for Sri Lanka.
So if the U.S. introduces tariffs potentially as high as 44% on their goods.
It's like kicking someone when they're just trying to get back on their feet. It makes their tea, their clothes, more expensive for Americans.
Meaning American buyers might just switch to competitors, like Vietnam or India.
That's the risk. They lose that crucial market share just when they need it most for their recovery. It makes everything harder, especially with inflation already being a problem. It's like trying to bail out a leaky boat while someone keeps poking new holes in it.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Africa, there's this thing called AGO, the African Growth and Opportunity Act. What's the story there?
AGO is really important. It lets 32 eligible African countries export a lot of different goods to the U.S. completely duty-free. No tariffs.
So it's designed to help boost their economies through trade.
Exactly. And it has worked. It's created jobs, spurred growth, particularly in sectors like textiles. Think of Lesotho, for example.
Lesotho, making jeans for brands like Levi's, right, under AGO.
Precisely. AGO has been vital for industries like that. But here's the catch.
There's always a catch.
AGOA is set to expire in September 2025. And with the current, shall we say, tariff-happy mood in global trade.
People are worried it might not get renewed.
Very worried. And adding to the anxiety, some of these African nations are already looking at potentially very steep tariffs if AGOA goes away or even before.
How steep are we talking?
We're talking potential tariffs of 50% for Lesotho on some goods, 47% for Madagascar, 40% for Mauritius, 31% for South Africa.
Wow, those aren't small numbers. They sound like potential job killers.
Absolutely. There was a World Bank study back in 2018 looking at Lesotho. It estimated that losing AGOA could shrink their GDP by 1% in just 2 years.
1% might not sound huge, but for a smaller economy like Lesotho
It's a major blow, like losing the keys to your car when you absolutely need to get somewhere important.
and South Africa, they're a bigger economy, but still concerned.
Deeply concerned. Their trade minister basically said these potential tariffs would nullify the benefits that they get from AGOA, especially for things like cars and metals.
So even if AGOA continues, high tariffs could undermine it anyway.
That seems to be the fear. Even Kenya, facing a lower potential tariff, around 10%, is watching this very nervously.
What makes the renewal uncertain? Is it just politics?
A lot of it is politics, yes. The U.S. Congress has to approve it, and they have other priorities.
Yeah.
Plus, that Buy American sentiment makes it harder to argue for extending benefits to other countries without getting something back.
It's like trying to get funding for a project when everyone's focused on purely local issues.
Something like that. It's complex.
You know, it's almost a slightly sarcastic silver lining here.
Hmm.
We're all learning geography. Lesotho, Mauritius, Bangladesh.
Huh. True. But beyond the trivia, the stakes are incredibly serious.
No, absolutely. This could reshape whole economies, change who trades with whom, and, yeah, affect the price of that T-shirt we buy.
And for many of these developing countries, it's more than just prices. It's about survival, economically speaking.
Because they're so specialized, right? Textiles, agriculture.
Exactly. They can't just switch to making computer chips overnight if the market for their clothes dries up. It's like asking a marathon runner to suddenly become a world-class gymnast. Different skill set, different infrastructure needed.
We keep coming back to places like Madagascar apparel, 47% potential tariff. Mauritius textiles, 40%. It's brutal.
And that's why, going back to Pamela Coke-Hamilton's point, tariffs can be more damaging than aid cuts.
Right, because trade creates the jobs, the growth engine. Aid is support, but it doesn't replace the engine itself.
Precisely. Closing a factory that employs hundreds is a much deeper wound than missing an aid payment, as critical as aid can be. It's like the difference between a donated bag of rice and having the local mill shut down permanently.
So are these countries just stuck, or are there strategies they can pursue?
They're definitely trying things. You see Kenya hoping maybe it can grab market share from others hit by higher tariffs, given its relatively lower rate for now.
And Bangladesh looking more towards Europe.
Yes, intensifying those efforts. South Africa is pushing hard for a new, separate trade deal with the U.S., though that's an uphill battle.
What about within Africa itself?
That's where the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AVCFTA, comes in. The hope is that it can boost trade between African nations, making them less reliant on outside partners.
Kind of like a neighborhood potluck, relying more on each other if the main supermarket gets difficult.
That's a decent analogy, yeah. Building resilience from within.
And China, what are their countermoves?
Well, they can try to boost their own domestic spending, get their own population buying more, and strengthen ties elsewhere, ASEAN countries, maybe Russia.
But again, none of that is a quick fix for potentially losing huge chunks of the U.S. market.
No, these are long-term adjustments. It paints a picture of the whole world kind of bracing for impact.
So why is the U.S. doing this, or considering it? What's the official reasoning?
The main arguments usually revolve around protecting American jobs from foreign competition and trying to reduce that big trade deficit with China. Remember the $356.5 billion figure for 2024.
And politically, Buy American is often a popular message, right?
It definitely resonates with some voters. Protect local industries, bring jobs home. It sounds appealing.
But does it actually work out that way? We've touched on the downsides.
Well, that's the debate. Many economists, in studies like those from the IMF in 2024, argue tariffs often backfire.
How so?
By raising prices for consumers here, because imported goods are the components needed to make things here get more expensive. And that can actually slow down overall economic growth.
That 0.7% global GDP drop we talked about.
Exactly. That reflects a potential drag on the whole system, not just the countries directly involved in the tariff dispute.
And there's another potential unintended consequence, isn't there, geopolitically?
Yes. If developing countries feel squeezed by U.S. tariffs, who might they turn to?
They might end up aligning more closely with China or other powers.
It's a real possibility. Economic pressure can definitely shift alliances and potentially deepen global divides, maybe in ways the U.S. didn't intend.
So wrapping this up, the big takeaway seems to be this U.S.-China tariff situation is way more than just a two-country squabble.
Absolutely. It's got complex, far-reaching global consequences. China faces real challenges despite its size, but the situation looks even more precarious for developing nations caught in the crossfire.
Places like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Lesotho, their economies are really on the line.
They really are. And it's not abstract economic theory.
Right. For us listening, it could mean paying more at the checkout, but it also reflects these bigger shifts happening in the global economy.
Understanding these connections, I think, is really valuable. It gives you a sort of front row seat to this huge economic drama unfolding. You see how decisions made in one place can impact lives thousands of miles away.
Definitely. And it makes you wonder, what are the really long-term effects? Could this whole thing push the world faster towards, say, more regional trading blocs, countries trading more with their neighbors?
That's a fascinating thought. Or could it even pave the way for new economic powers to emerge, ones we aren't even focusing on as much right now while the giants are preoccupied?
Yeah, will the future map of global trade look completely different because of disputes like this? Something to keep thinking about.